So, hey, what's up, everyone? I have a special guest today. My name is Michelle Snider. Some people know me as the Barbecue Becky Slayer, but I'm a journalism student, and we're trying to do new forms of media, and podcast is definitely one of them. And so I'm here with Jesse Smith, who is a Oakland candidate for mayor, and he's new to politics, so I thought it would be really interesting if we break down what your experience is like getting into politics for the first time.
It's my first time as a candidate, but I've worked on campaigns before.
You've worked, so you are involved in you've been involved
in the electoral side of politics. Yeah, see, and that's not to get too sidetracked, but a colleague of mine once asked a room of activists, "How many of you work in politics?" And nobody raised their hand.
Yeah.
And she's in the bureaucracy, in the government, and she's like, "No, all of you work in politics." But people have this idea that politics is just the government or just elections.
Yeah.
But like all activists have the same experience and go through the same challenges, like in terms of social challenges and ambitions as any politician.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one way or another, if you're actually into activism, you're into politics because we all have a stake in it, in changing it and everything. So why don't we go into your history in politics? You're with the Green Party, right?
No, not with the Green Party. My politics don't align with theirs very much, but as far as the local Green Party, the Oakland Greens goes, I really respect them and their work.
Yeah.
They're reliable, they have a lot of integrity, and I like to contribute to their work and push their efforts forward.
Okay. So what, are you with a party?
No. I'm very much nonpartisan. My own political alignment is as an anarchist, specifically a technocratic anarchist.
So what's a technocratic
anarchist? So as opposed to like a anarcho-capitalist or anarcho-socialist, these kinds of ideas, technocracy is the idea of outsourcing the role of government through design. Tech means skill, so it basically breaks down to power to the skill. So by giving authority based on skill and expertise, we can eliminate a lot of need for government. For instance, the economy should be run by economists. And
that totally makes sense. Like, I've been saying that for I don't know how long.
Right. But instead we elect lawyers.
Yeah.
We tend to, and they don't have the skill set, the relevant skill set, and then things are wildly inefficient. Whether or not we should use particular bolts on building a bridge shouldn't be left up to a vote.
Yeah.
We shouldn't leave it up to a vote as to whether or not we increase the allowable amount of mercury in the water. That should be left up to people who understand this kind of thing. And over history, we've seen that we can get rid of modes of oppression through design. Even our own government is an improvement on previous forms.
Yeah. And
technocratic anarchism is basically we can ultimately eliminate things, but in the meanwhile, its practical application, especially within electoral politics, has to do with deferring to experts instead of deferring to lobbyists or moneyed interests, that kind of thing.
That's very interesting. Okay, this is when I get like really confused with the world of anarchy sometimes, and sometimes I feel like an anarchist myself, and then sometimes I'm like, but I'm not one of those people that is just like, I'm going to punch somebody in the face.
Well, that would be oppression,
Yeah, that's how I mean, I tend to feel about it. Unless somebody was really aggressive or I was protecting somebody, then I'll defend them, and I have no problems with getting, I feel like physicality is like the last thing, because we're such an advanced society by now. We shouldn't be acting as if we did with our ancestors a long time ago when they were just fighting over land and, burning up villages and raping the women, so, but I totally understand on that front, and also I feel like the anarchists that came out, like Antifa has this, they're either like loved or hated kind of thing, but I really do feel like they stopped a lot of fascism in the last year, so I do give them credit for that. It's a tricky line to tread. So when you say like capital, all these different anarchists, is there like a long list of this? Is this?
Yeah, I mean, there's like Another form of anarchist design that I really appreciate is Anarcho-Syndicalism, which is what was used in Spain before the fascists came in and ended that revolution. It was kind of a blend of capitalism and unionism.
Yeah.
And they had a very successful and thriving industrial economy at a time when all the other economies of the world, socialist and capitalist, were crashing. The anarchists had overcome the problems of limited production and scarcity.
Yeah.
And that particular mode I have a lot of interest in, and I believe could have a lot of viability. A lot of forms of anarchism tend to embrace contradictions, like anarcho-capitalism has embedded in it like this libertarian notion of as long as we're all, voluntarily associating with each other and doing free trade, then we're all free. But then we wind up becoming dominated by, ruled by the algorithms of the market.
Yeah.
And that's just surrendering human authority to a non-human entity.
Yeah.
Which is, in a way...
Which is another ruling class, because that's all corporations really are.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's whoever is in the top, whoever has the most money, and that's who makes all the decisions, and nobody else really has a say unless they decide to strike. And in corporations, nobody strikes. They just try and go to another job.
Right.
So that's really interesting. Do you have, for people, because I know a lot of people, and believe it or not, I have a lot of people that either lean left or lean right or don't lean in, don't believe in being partisan, like yourself. If they wanted to learn more about the different types of anarchy, what would you recommend for them to do?
I've always, I don't agree with all of his brands of anarchism. Noam Chomsky is, of course, a great writer on these matters. He's an advocate of anarcho-syndicalism, and it's a very well-tested system. There's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of propaganda and a lot of inner fighting between the different anarchist sects. But I think the best way to go about it is to judge for yourself. If one sees a contradiction within a system like anarcho-communism or anarcho-capitalism, then accept that contradiction. You have to judge it for yourself.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, one doesn't become a very good anarchist by simply taking something on the authority of others.
Yeah.
It's,
that's a lot of what I say. It's also kind of why, on the libertarian side, in some ways I can agree with them because government wastes a lot of money and it's because there's a lot of corruption. And then, it's like, how do we correct that corruption? I think a lot of it happens because people aren't paying attention. It's like they just think that they got to vote once every 4 years for the president, and that's it, and then everything will be fine, and the president just handles everything. All 350 million people in our country alone, and then on top of that, all the other countries that have billions of people. We're like nothing but a little speck compared to some of these countries. So, like libertarian, they kind of drive me crazy because they want the police to protect them, but they don't want to pay taxes.
Right, that's a form of socialism they support.
Yeah, exactly. That is socialism.
And
is
also
it not?
neoliberals.
Libertarians.
Yeah. Neoliberals and libertarians have more in common than they would like to admit.
Yeah.
And they're enemies, but they're both free market fundamentalists.
Yeah.
These nuances in ideologies, narcissism of small differences, really creates a lot of confusion, but people like to join a gang, they like to be tribal, they like their clique.
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
Politics is a great way to get into that.
We're enjoying our Friday out here.
But it occurred to me a great way to really learn about anarchism is to work in an anarchist collective. It's a business model as well, where you don't have the inefficient layer of management and owners.
Yeah.
And workers all learn from each other. When I've worked in anarchist collectives before, I've worked in a few. A really great example was a bakery I worked in, because we all learned each other's jobs. And we were all just constantly learning different skills and growing as people by doing that, instead of being put into a particular role and just becoming an expert at that. We all became experts at various different things.
Yeah.
And just living anarchism in that way is really, it's more than just an ideological, political idea. It's also like a spiritual path to not oppress people, to study manipulation and persuasion, because people manipulate each other without realizing it, in order to not manipulate others, to allow those around us to grow and express themselves.
Yeah. So it's a consciousness of your space and other people's space, not the individualized kind of culture that we have now, that we've built for a long time, which goes along very well with why there's such a strong libertarian movement now. But then once you try and shift away from that, it's like automatically you're not even a socialist anymore, you're a communist. Like the two are the same, right? What do you think about communism?
Communism, I find a fault in the means of revolution that was proposed by Marx, and any critical theorist agrees. Marx erred technically in dualism. He asserted that it would be there's the paradox of how do we become the right kind of people to live in that kind of society? How do we become more enlightened without the benefits of the environment that would condition us to be that?
Yeah.
For instance, people can't just have democracy imposed on them. They have to have a cultural standing for it.
Yeah.
But once you have that in your culture, then the people that grow up in that democracy are right for it. And the same goes for tyranny. So how do we get to that ideal state where nobody feels like they own anything and we're all sharing and to each according to their needs?
Yeah, that's why I say this stuff doesn't work, though, because in human nature, naturally, there's always going to be people that are apathetic and don't want to share, just point blank. And humans are prone to error. They're prone to make mistakes, and they also may not feel like it's a mistake to want everything, to want these more than everybody else, to feel self-entitled. That they may have been raised that way, or they may have been raised broke and they just see this American dream.
Yeah. Or neurotypal differences, or cultural differences.
Yeah. It's almost, to me, it's like you're asking people to be harmonious, which is the same thing that fascism does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it requires, authoritarianism, and the historical examples we have of it. Communism and capitalism are both failed systems.
Yeah.
Neither provides for its people, and neither liberates or enlightens. And communism has in itself, its history is a little difficult to break down. China is communistic. Yeah. That's where we get all of our phones from. Apparently it's a really productive form of economy.
Yeah, I don't really think that they're truly communist if they are participating in a capitalist society.
I'm a little...
They don't allow their own people to have a good equitable pay, and they don't allow their people to buy their phones, but they are still supplying global capitalism with their means. So to me, it's like you're not, I don't know, I think that there's that line too, is like we can dog capitalism all we want. The reason why I like socialism is there's still room for that ability. You don't rely on the needed resources like water, housing, roads, like that should be a centralized service that everybody has access to equally. But if you don't have, some innovation in business, we're not going to have the technology, we're not going to have the advancement. So it's like, to me, it's a balance. How do you balance all of that out?
Well, that's one of the greatest failures of capitalism that communism and socialism and the military-industrial complex have always worked to overcome, is that capitalism can't innovate technologically. There's a problem with it. It's too short-term in its goals. So if a corporation spends $4 million on advertising, they'll make more money than spending $4 million on R&D.
Yeah.
So there's always been this need to circumvent the free market system in order to advance technologically. This is why the Soviets were always so much more advanced than we were during the space race, and why Cuba has come up with all of these radical or revolutionary cures for cancer.
Yeah.
Is because that command economy is extremely effective. Of course, it's ultimately enforced with guns and violence. It's hard to argue with the results, though. the idea that we can advance without compulsion. So we have the market. The market becomes another form of compulsion, work or die. I suppose what, especially the technocratic view, is that technology liberates us and empowers us. So when a robot replaces you at work, you should be rich. Under a capitalist system.
I mean, yeah, now they're talking about like everybody having some sort of income, because eventually we're not going. I hate when I see like politicians trying to be like, well, let's bring up these old factory jobs. It's like, it's over.
Yeah.
We don't go back. We're not going back to crawling on the ground either. Like, let's go, you know, that's part of what kind of drives me crazy about some people. It's like they want to go backwards, and
to the good old days.
Yeah, and then they don't want to have any ideas, and this is why I kind of wanted to have these kind of discussions. So let's bring it to Oakland, because why did you run for mayor? I'm just saying that because you don't have like a huge presence, and like you going up against somebody like Libby Schaaf is like, you know, definitely one of those. Was it that Goliath story?
Right.
You know,
it's impossible for me to win.
Yeah.
Because elections are won with hard work, people knocking on doors, phone banking, and I don't have a team like that.
Yeah.
But what I did was I constructed my campaign as a public service. In ranked choice voting, I'm not taking away anyone's votes. In fact, I could possibly boost votes for candidates and the system in general. I was largely compelled because candidates during an election can do a lot of charity work, and just by showing up at an area, you can get attention and funds, and I can boost messages. A lot of times candidates get approached by people who have been unjustly fired or evicted, and a candidate's phone call can, you know, that can be all that you need to, you know, help their situation.
Okay.
And so having seen that, working in electoral politics, you know, I wanted to provide that to the community. But as far as my place in the election for voting for me, I'm a single issue candidate, and people can rank me first, and then that registers their support for my single issue.
And what's your single issue?
Radical police reform, which the model is civilian administration. So no police chief, no internal affairs, just a larger organization of which armed police are a small portion. And they're accountable to civilians. Instead of internal affairs, a human resource department.
Okay.
So if a cop messes up, they don't report or get reported to another cop. When people register complaints against the police, they're not registering these complaints with cops. They're registering it to a larger organization, which also focuses on other public safety matters. There's another candidate, Saeed Karamuz. He came up with the idea separately for me. It's pretty similar, and I can't help but steal some of his wording. But he talks about abolishing OPD and replacing it with the Oakland Public Safety and Health Department, which would concern itself with having like environmentalists and mental health workers and things like this. We both share the idea that if a call doesn't require a gun and a badge, don't send a gun to the situation. People get pulled over for a traffic violation. That's the Department of Transportation.
And they get paid so much. Like, to me, that is just so...
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, hello. Like,
I'm cautious in how I use such phrasing, but a police state, they influence our elected officials. They basically pass laws. They influence the development contracts in the area through their union, and they get the lion's share of the budget.
Yeah.
For toys and lounging. I mean, a lot of their overtime is just hanging out, watching TV.
Yeah.
And, you know, they got a few areas
where you could have somebody like security guard. I remember we used to have way more security guards. Now it's like everybody just call the police. Oh man.
Security guards, like private security guards?
Yeah, but you know, something more of that in a community sense where you would have certain guidelines instead of it just being for somebody protecting a private business. You're protecting the public.
Yeah, that's
you know, like you're more of the first line of response, and you're not actually ready to shoot somebody.
Right. Yeah, that's part of my plan. So there's the idea of how do you actually implement the civilian administration, because you run up against all of these blockades. Got to get a charter amendment, you know, but you also have to deal with the police union.
Yeah.
And we know how to bust up unions through private contracts. And so my initial crisis management of the situation is especially to get the cops off the streets, because we have known rapists patrolling the streets, responding to house calls. We just need to get them off the streets.
And in San Francisco case, it was like Mothers, I can't remember the name, but they're also constantly at 950 Bryant protesting every Friday because the very police officers that shot their sons, they see them right there in the Mission.
Yeah.
That is, I couldn't imagine something like that.
Often,
that's supposed to be the person that's protecting you.
When they use these cops in PR shots with Oakland police, or the cops that were involved in the cover-up of the trafficking of a minor, when they're the ones giving the report at City Hall on trafficking, this is almost kind of like a form of gaslighting.
On myself. I've been a good girl. I can vouch for it.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like in an abusive family situation where the abuser is there at Thanksgiving and nobody can talk about it.
It's
and
the head
it
of
becomes
the dominating head of the house is also the one policing themselves.
Right. So my idea for busting up the union is basically something like the charter school model, where communities, neighborhoods get stipends from the government to hire their own private security. And that security may or may not have guns. It depends on what the community wants. Be highly regulated by the government, local hire only. And that's a temporary solution. In 10 years, it would look like Mad Max. That's why privatizing police isn't, an ultimate solution.
I was a little because I'm like, well, that there's going to be private citizens who are going to try and make their own little gangs.
Oh yeah. Oh, and
they'll turn their community policing into gang enforcement. So that's a whole other level. Like then it's like, do you need another jurisdiction above that is actually policing all of our policing?
Right.
And then
it's an infinitely regressive problem.
And then that ends up being almost like the same problem we have, because they could be like, well, we want it this way, and now we're going to overrule you. It's just.
But when you think about the downtown ambassadors and how much security they provide, because there might be a mental health crisis, and one of these friendly people in a lime green shirt walks up, assesses the situation instead of a cop being called.
Yeah.
Because people are nervous. They don't know what to do, and they call cops. And a cop doesn't show up, as you know.
Well, it depends, I mean, like if it's something stupid, like somebody sleeping or...
Right,
then I guess
but just having people on the lookout, making sure that things are okay, this can go a long way towards mitigating the need for cops and establishing a new standard. We could also have, the creation of new social networks, young people being given jobs. A local gentleman who runs a security agency in Oakland told me that his reason for getting into private security was to provide jobs for people who have just kind of a part of them that needs to be violent but is noble. Want to protect people.
And I think that makes sense.
So he gives them an avenue for this, and he creates jobs locally. And there are a lot of people. I mean, that's been my experience when I was a teenager. I was a gang member, and we had a lot of noble ambition with this. We were looking out for our friends and our neighborhood and the elders in our community. And then we were also just young and stupid, so we would get into young, stupid stuff. Yeah. And the mission would get,
That was pretty funny when we were in the Oakland Forum, and you said, as a former gang member, I can actually speak this.
I'm the only former gang member on the dais here, right? Yeah. Okay, just checking. Libby? Okay, yeah.
Which is far in your past, and now where do you get all this, how do you educate yourself on all this stuff?
Yeah, I had some pretty bad parents, so I didn't go to elementary school hardly. Kind of attended high school, didn't graduate, I was hardly there. Was a note taker for university students, which is basically if you're rich enough, you can get a doctor's note and someone else takes your classes and you get the credit.
Oh, I've heard of this before. So then, even though you don't get the credits, you're actually getting the skills, and then they get the job, and you should have been working there.
And I'm a writer, so I can write on any topic. I don't even need to understand it and still get an A on the paper. Okay. There were a lot of things that I wrote on, and I had no idea what I was talking about. And then a lot of the classes I took were the prereq classes. just to get those out of the way for people. And so overly and extensively educated in things like the feminist perspective of the Japanese internment. Just like all of this like postmodern academic method, way overly educated in that. I'm not so much a fan of it, but it's extremely useful. This is, so I'm an autodidact. So is my grandfather.
What is an autodidact?
Autodidact is a self-educated person.
Okay. With big words.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's another thing. Of all the words that people don't know, autodidacts are, people who go to university don't know the word autodidact.
Yeah.
It's kind of a...
yeah. Well, it makes sense. I'm an autodidact of photography, but I'm starting to take classes now. I'm like backwards. So, what do you really think about, like, the politics going on in Oakland? Is like, I don't know how to like maybe narrow it down, but some people say it's corrupt. There's a lot of newcomers though coming in. There's a lot of people that are also been around that have good ideas, but nobody pays attention as much to them. I mean, do you have like a viewpoint on just your perspective and your experience so far?
A model that I work with when trying to understand democracy and politics is that it's like a weather system. It's impersonal. And I first of all think that's a good way to look at it because it's healthy. You don't get mad at a hurricane.
Yeah.
It can kill people, just like politics.
Yeah, but that's life.
But to come at it from a place of personal... That's marketing from the politicians. They want people to get angry at the other team because that's how they get the vote out or get out the vote. And when so there's a lot of like human nature and tendencies. People are generally not very intellectual. They're mostly emotional and they respond emotionally. For instance, if a politician is completely antithetical to one's values, but they show up at a person's church or event and they meet that person, suddenly they like them.
Yeah.
Because people have a tendency to do that. Yeah. Once they can humanize this one person that they would despise on paper, oh, well, I'm voting for them because they came to my church. I hear this again and again from people. And also the partisan mentality. If you attack a politician, the partisans for that politician will take that personally in their sense of tribal fealty, their alliance, their allegiance. And, so it largely becomes a matter of emotion. And a lot of democracy is based on just drilling ideas into people's heads through repetition so that they respond that way and you get the votes.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of democracy, even in its best form and expression, because...
Well, what would be an alternative?
Anarchism. No government. No, like, for instance, nobody could vote on who could get married or not. If you leave it up to democracy, you get slavery because you have the majority voting to enslave the minority.
Well, if you don't have the Constitution and those laws and people believing in those laws to uphold those laws, then you can still have slavery.
Right. Because
one way or another, people are going to build their own power system.
Well, the idea, what gets America by so well is, and it's borrowed from the Iroquois Constitution, is it's called Cybernetic Engineering, which is where elements of society are organized so that they check each other's power, checks and balances. There's a cyclical nature to it. So if one group starts to get more powerful, it empowers another group to check their power, and around the cycle goes.
That's what democracy is supposed to be. It's more in the people's hands, because unless you're going to make some sort of algorithm to do it, I don't know how else you would do it.
In order to, well, for instance, like with Prop 8, when gay marriage was outlawed, that was democratic, and it was overturned by a very strange autocratic institution of the Supreme Court where people are appointed for life.
Yeah.
I mean, these are kings and queens. These are despots, basically. We have this complicated system with the crowdsourcing element. And that crowdsourcing element is a check on the power of the other institutions. Even the Second Amendment, us having guns, is a check and a balance.
Yeah.
The idea that we can violently overthrow, which I don't believe is possible, but that was the initial argument for it.
Because that was before we had
muskets,
you know, like they just, but you know, it's just like you're participating in a democratic process.
It's you know, and then at the same time, see, I myself didn't vote for a very long time because if women weren't allowed to vote, voting would be sexist, and if black people aren't allowed to vote, voting is racist. And it's just my own personal assessment that there is so much disenfranchisement of the black vote that for me to vote is unethical, and so I stayed out of it for a very long time. I recently voted just to take pictures of it, and my initial ambition was I wanted to vote as a proxy for a prisoner, knowing that that's very illegal. A loved one wouldn't let me do it because of the risk. Crystal Mason, a woman who voted not knowing she wasn't allowed to, has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for this. But the motivation to vote, people, you know, it's like, hey, I'm a white guy, or functionally white. I don't need my voice to be heard. I don't need someone looking out for my best interests, you know.
But unless you had other people's best interests. I mean, like, if we had voted many, many years ago, this is my thing, is, you know, we go back to all of these things that we just talked about, whether you're talking about capitalism and communism and supply and demand and consumers and you know, all of this stuff, and then we talk about democracy, and it comes at the same level of culture and participation, and you know, one way or another, if you let go of the participation and another group has all the power, they can overrule you.
Yeah.
And the thing that kind of drove me crazy, I was taught by my dad about politics. Even yesterday, he called me to talk about like his, you know, arm surgery, and he brings up, you know, we somehow are talking about, you know, he's like, well, San Diego always had fascists out there, you know, like, and I'm like, well, now I know why I am the way I am, but you know, like somehow we always talk about politics, and so he taught me in a different way. Especially coming from a generation where, you know, like my grandfather and his brothers, you know, they were in the Air Force and fought World War II and all these different things. I guess
Nazi killers.
Yes. I mean, that's like, this is the difference, though. You know, it's crazy because, like, on my mom's side of the family, they, you know, like, they're Trump supporters.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did that real quick.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, but I was always ahead against my mom. You know, like, we never agreed on anything, and she actually kind of hated the fact that I was like my dad, because I guess they had the hots for each other. Let's just say that's all they had in common. They were teenagers. Enough, right? They were teenagers. They were cute. You know, like, what can you say? Going back to it though, one of the things that frustrated me, knowing that I've followed politics all this time, you know, Barack Obama was one of the first people I was excited about, because, you know, and I knew he wasn't going to be perfect. You know, I definitely am not big on like the drone strikes and stuff like that. Yeah. And I feel like I somewhat understand, though, because I knew the history of this politics all the way to the 80s, to Reagan and Bush and all this kind of stuff. I knew that he was going to have quite a fight. And when he said, yes, we can, he was meaning everyone being involved. And then when it came to 2010, nobody voted, and the Republicans took over. And this has led to where we are, because people just go in, vote for the president. It's like populism. I mean, let's just be frank. Yeah. Even Barack Obama, the way that he voted, I think those of us who are into politics, who are political nerds in a sense, we probably thought that there was that he was elected because of his policies, but it was populism.
Oh yeah, no, his policies were more war hawkish than anyone else. As a junior senator, he didn't turn down a single military spending bill, which was curious to those that were those of us that were paying attention. He was speaking hawk language and the dog whistles during the debates. And
yeah, and some of his people that he put in his cabinet were also just...
Hillary, like up there with Kissinger and Negroponte in terms of being a war criminal and overthrowing other nations. It's a very blood-soaked 4 years when she was his Secretary of State. That's also when we get the destabilization of Central America, which has led to all the...
But a lot of these issues happened way before they were ever there. So it's almost like you have this blood-soaked issue slapped on you, and you're already in war, and, so what are you going to do? And so I don't know. I feel like those issues are very complicated, and there's no way that you could be president it's almost like we try and rule the whole entire world, which I think is a major issue because we're always trying to be the best. We're always trying to be the one that is the most that everybody's supposed to listen to as far as politics.
Well, I think this really becomes a matter of the design issues that our system, as it was designed, very stable, very beneficial at large to democratic ideals. The president originally wasn't elected. That was the Electoral College, where you have the most learned intellectuals of every state selected by the governor get together and choose the president.
But that's just a rubber stamp. Like they always go by the party and what the party says, and parties they won. It's always a rubber stamp. It's just
that's what it's turned into because we've democratized it. Before it was democratized, the president, we'd wake up and find out who the president was, and they wouldn't have a mandate. And when you take away the power of mandate from the president, it's 350 million people. The idea that we all support whatever they do gives a carte blanche to declaring war.
Well, it wasn't that you just automatically support, but I think that's where people get it confused. When he says, yes, we can, it's not, he never once said, you can't challenge me either. He was totally fine with people on his... Who believed in him.
He surrounded himself with antagonists. He did when he staffed his...
Yeah, he surrounded him. He was trying to be bipartisan, and he knew that he was going into something that would have to be, because it's always been going more and more. And another thing that also drives me crazy is this whole entire, what the Republicans have been doing has been going on for a long time. It's been planned. It's like that, we're going to hold on to this power that has been here since the start.
Yeah, and we're seeing, I think, with the pitchforks and torches mentality after the Kavanaugh hearing, we take into account that the gerrymandering of the Republican Party, there's no representation in our government. There is no popular support in our government, no mandate. I mean, even Trump, who got something like, 60 million votes? There's 300 million people in this country. Half of his votes were votes against Hillary. So that's 30 million people.
And she still got 3 more million.
Oh, exactly, right.
Than him.
So the Republicans are acting like they have the support of half the population. It's really only like 10.
About 43% eligible voters, because we have to keep in mind there are people that are not eligible, and there's kids and people of different ages. But you're talking about 43% who are eligible to vote didn't vote at all,
right? Because
they don't like anything.
Well, there are a lot of people are just disenfranchised. Like when Kaepernick said he's not voting for either. Well, his issue is racism, and he's like a watchdog for that, and he must be respected for taking such a hit personally on that. And I don't expect him to support either side. Neither candidate was good enough for him. That's fine.
Which one are you talking about?
Kaepernick.
He said he wasn't voting for
Hillary or Trump because both of them failed his test.
I'm just gonna be real though. I mean, I've never really been a big Hillary fan. She used to drive me crazy. And one of the things that drove me crazy most actually was I'm very careful about speaking about her because the Republicans have done a really good job of mixing up what she has done and making it something else. That is she's a freaking bloody murderer, and I don't think she is. I feel like she's like that, older generation white woman that sticks to the laws, and the laws are murderous.
Right.
Okay, so that's a big difference. But you know, and I definitely do see her as like, you know, I was worried about her war hawkishness. And, you know, that's a...
But the idea of her with the silencer sneaking around,
like she's not out there killing her political order.
Yeah.
You know, she sticks to she goes by the rules. So that kind of drives me crazy, and I don't.
That's
totally
the banality of evil, though. You know,
I did not see her equivalent to Trump. So to me, it was like I did vote for her because I was like, at least I saw all these activists coming together and they were protesting, and I was like, we can go out and protest, and we can change. And she actually does move because she understands that sort of, you know, like. We like populism, but then once you break out of that populism, that mode where it has to be somebody likable, it has to be somebody that just makes you feel good, you know, and
that can be the only skill a politician has. Yeah.
No, I understand the policies, and you need to change this, and we all believe this. Then I felt like she would start moving if people started joining together and moving. We could have made a whole other movement in that direction.
She is one of those politicians that can be swayed that way, and they receive a lot of criticism because they're called empty suits. Yeah. They go with whatever the power does.
That's pretty much it.
But
that also drives me. But the one thing that really drove me crazy from the start, I was like, please don't make it about her being a woman. Oh, that's all they wanted to do.
You mean her team? Yeah, I know.
I don't care. I'm like, dude,
this had me reflect on
women can do bad things too. You know. I don't understand why, you know, I know it's the first female president. Cool, all right, you know, like, we'll get there one day, but I would like it to be the right...
Obama didn't run on being black.
Yeah.
He didn't. He never brought it up.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a few times where he said something like, it's time, and we all knew what he meant, you know, but he didn't make that an issue. I don't know if that was strategic or just his own sense of taste, you know, but he left that alone.
I definitely think it was strategic, but he also... You know, he understood that there are certain people in America, you know, especially in these white areas, you know, the white voting population that don't like identity politics. They don't see themselves as racist, even though they have those undertones that they don't actually understand. But to make things about race suddenly turns them off. And it's the same thing about making it about any kind of issue. It's like, because you're supposed to be representing all of us, it shouldn't be that way. But we're just in this time when we finally can actually talk about racism. So we're kind of stuck in that. But, you know, I know that I'm straying off, you know. It was just, when you were talking about democracy and everything, I was like, I participate in it, but, you know, like, to me, none of these functions mean a damn thing if people are not on the same page of understanding. And that's why I feel like, for one thing, the education has to be put out there, because once people are more educated and they're not more concerned with, you know, like, the only thing that I really see most people interested in is sports. So shout out to Kaepernick for actually, you know, and that other sports, what's her name? Jamila? That commentator, I don't follow sports, but she got a lot of slack for supporting him. And, you know, I love when people do speak out. I feel like that should be the norm, instead of us being silent. So when we're silent, we're allowing this open vacuum for misinformation and in that kind of populism.
People speaking in our place. Yeah.
Yes, and I feel the same way about democracy. Even though we may not like it, it's like this constant fight that we have to do, and we may feel like icky even participating in it. I feel like that's the problem. It's like,
no, it is. I mean, voting made me feel dirty for a second, you know, but running for office, it's so compromising. And this is something that trips me out. We take people and we haze them and we berate them and we torture them psychically and we don't allow them to sleep for days on end while they're campaigning, and then they get brain damage from all the stress, and then we expect them to lead us. You know?
And they're not really leading, they're just they're making some decisions, but it's almost like a CEO. And that's why people believe that Trump could do it too. And you see that he's able to go in there without any knowledge at all and figure out the system. Now he knows the system, and now we're pretty much screwed in that sense.
Yeah.
He knows how to actually work everything. He's like, yeah, now we're going to downsize.
These are old gears and levers.
Yeah, he's like, now we're just going to downsize and shut this down, and it's all going to be about me.
I mean, it was built by drunk people, That's, the reverence we have for our
They probably
system.
all had syphilis.
And yeah, right, half of them mad from syphilis, drunk, and dying of a toothache,
Well, some people are still damn near like that now. Well, and one of the things I got into journalism is because, though, that First Amendment came from a journalist. So to me, that it goes back to that information and education, because that's what journalists, that's where people say media really messed up. Journalists weren't really being journalists.
Right. No,
they're
they were
supposed to inform you about the truth of what's going on, the corruption, the not just the good but the bad. And there's a lot of people that are like, well, I don't want to be depressed. I want just good news. Don't.
Yeah. Well, people want the news that reaffirms their own beliefs.
Yeah. They don't want to be wrong.
As a product that they're selling, also as an autodidact, I can tell you that things like the Learning Channel and the History Channel that tell you that they're selling you education, they're not. They're selling you the feeling of being educated. And politicians or news media, they don't sell you information. They sell you the feeling of being right or on the winning team. When Romney lost to Obama, there were all those people who were shocked. Now, Obama's election, this was real mandate. For the first time, I think, since Eisenhower, that someone took 2 terms with a true mandate, popularly. And how could they not see that coming? Romney's campaign was a mess.
Yeah.
It was just on fire the whole time.
And now people are like, oh, he's such a nice guy.
Yeah.
I don't understand any of you.
Or even, Milan Kundera he said something like, the aura of nostalgia illuminates everything such that even the guillotine takes on.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, back in the day. Remember George W. Bush? What a gentleman he was.
So what are you talking about? He was the one that set up what we got going on.
Yeah.
And not just him. It was it goes back.
I mean, the only president I like out of the 20th century, or maybe not that far, maybe FDR or whatever, but Jimmy Carter, wonderful president. Total pacifist. We didn't go to war on his dime. He's often called the president who didn't fire a shot. I understand that technically that's not true. There was a little bit of skirmish that we had somewhere. But he was extremely peaceful. Yeah. And he put solar panels on the White House. And both parties agreed to demonize him.
Yeah.
They celebrate him now and say, oh, he's the greatest post-president. But where he really betrayed the tradition of the American presidency was in not being a blood-soaked warlord.
Or a populist.
Or a populist, yeah.
Yeah, just, I have to...
Well, what's wrong with populism?
So
Isn't
I would
that
say...
democratically,
Populism is, to me, it's empty, it's shallow.
Because, doesn't it mean just...
It means a package. It's a package deal. So, the most extreme example right now of populism is Trump.
Right.
And
He's a grassroots campaign.
He's a grassroots campaign. And so populism can be good. I think it was great for Obama, but once again, it's shallow because it got him elected, but people still didn't understand what he was talking about when he said we all need to work together to make this change. Because people did not. And we would have gone way further if they did.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I mean, and people don't want to hear that. You remember those Berkeley rallies last year?
Oh, yeah.
I was at the one on August 27th, just sitting there watching, Black Bloc crash down that wall. I envisioned it like the Kool-Aid guy breaking through the wall. I was just like, oh, this is very interesting. I was in the center, that center on MLK. I was just sitting there it was a nice, beautiful day, and I was having this conversation with this guy, and he was like, yeah, we're just, he was trying to sound like he was this intellectual and everything, and I was like, well, he's like, we just need to get rid of Trump, and I was like, well, then what happens? I mean, you think that we just give up and we stop? So all this energy just stops. So we're just going to elect somebody and they're going to solve all the problems, and we're never going to have this problem again. We have to keep participating, and we have to be the checks and balances at times. Right. So that to me is what is supposed to be democracy that I don't feel like a lot of people understand. And maybe it's something else, but to me populism fails at that point. unless you can keep the energy, it's very hard to keep the energy of people excited like that, though. And you'll see that with a lot of Trump supporters. So they had to really up this Kavanaugh case in order to get people excited on their side.
That's what that was, yeah.
And that's why they throw these distractions. They constantly have to feed this fire. But if they don't have any coal for that fire, the fire is going to start dying down. That's what populism does. So without it being a constant, we know what we have to do. And if we actually had a really well-built system, we probably wouldn't have to do as much as we are having to do now. But if we all were participating in some sort of fashion or way, even not necessarily voting, but, just participating in your local, whatever's going on with your school, whatever's going on down the street, that kind of stuff.
That's where, democracy in terms of people having power and being sophisticated so much that we don't need these leaders and rulers over us. If we really are about that, it gets rid of voting. For instance, if we organize and handle a lot of problems on our own, we don't need the elected officials for a lot. There's this model called participatory budgeting, where a city is divided into different neighborhood councils, and residents constitute these councils, and everyone votes on how to spend the budget. Well, now that you've taken the budget power away from elected officials, what are elected officials for? When the people directly, through direct democracy, control the budget, this is a huge outsourcing of authority from the government. Would we vote to have all our money spent on cops? No. So that's also an aspect of the technocratic design, is direct democracy within certain areas, and the idea of decentralizing power and authority. Instead of having everyone support some leader who then actually, in order to get anything done, has to betray us. And this is also another thing we see consistently with elected officials is their base. Anyway. The base is the first group of people that you burn because they're loyal to you, and you can betray them and they'll still vote for you. So this is why we often see a flip-flop with candidates once they're in office, because they already got that vote. Now they're going to go out and make these people happy. There's no, it's just an economic decision in terms of what they do. So we have candidates like Bill Clinton the first time around. Universal health care for all. Turns into a hyper-capitalist, He basically ran on the idea of a soft form of socialism. A basic monicum of socialism, at least. Scrap that, went the other way. Still got supported by, the Rust Belt and all the working class people because he was that hero.
And he, as far as what they used to focus on, the white working class, he did very well. Because we did have a surplus. We did basically he taxed the rich. So, we had a surplus of money. And we had, and I remember that time too, I was confused about that 3 strikes rule that came out here, and I didn't realize that was going to be so terrible. But I remember I was in high school the first time around when he was elected, and I remember us talking about we have to move away from prison systems because it's not just locking people up.
It's just ridiculous.
Isn't working, but it was more we need a Band-Aid for now.
Bring them to heal.
I was one of those that used to go crazy in the 90s. I'm so tired of all these people. But I think that kind of does help me understand where you're coming from, because it just confuses me, and especially there's so many different types of anarchists, and sometimes myself I'm I'm ready to tear some shit down, my damn self, but I'm ready at just the right time. And at the same time, it's I would rather build stuff up for the future, for the future generations. I would rather not have to go, because to me, this is a tragedy that we have to be Well,
there's I forget what the quote is, but the idea comes from the father of anarchism, Mikhail Bakunin. Basically says that we get the government we deserve. That when we have tyranny or whatever degree of tyranny, it's because we lack the sophistication to rule ourselves. And there are times when the system oppresses people such that they are bereaved of the sophistication for self-governance. But there is also a truth to it, that when we that getting Trump is because, there's something wrong. Why haven't we risen up? What is wrong with us that we're not handling our own? With having thousands of people sleeping in tents, so many of them grandmothers. Why didn't we take action years ago? What would have been necessary? Why are we accepting the terms that are handed to us? There's a form of democracy from the Yugoslavian tradition. It's called the Ljudska. And it's the idea of a spontaneous militia that rises up and overthrows the government. And so while they would have technical dictatorships, because of their culture, the dictatorship was always democratically endorsed with a mandate, because as soon as they didn't have the people's mandate, everyone would pick up their pitchforks and torches, and the dictators were they would talk about this, because they would point to their validity, their why they're in power. They're like, well, I haven't been overthrown. You all have your pitchforks and torches. If I mess up, you're going to come take me out, right? Well, no one's doing it.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
But it requires a lot of energy
right,
and so of course.
But that culture has that energy. So when the Ljudska was their form of democracy, a violent form of democracy, like a public stoning is in a way a form of democracy. When people cast votes in the Senate, especially for Kavanaugh, they know he's dirty.
Yeah.
But and if they could be the one person to make this decision, they might not do it, but they feel like they're part of a group making the wrong decision. The people that voted against Hillary, so they voted for Trump, they're like, I'm just a drop in the bucket. And people don't feel...
they feel like they're getting what they want, and a lot of it has to do with religion in that case.
Well, religion...
Because I've talked to a lot of these people. Now, in my mom's case, it just was weird, because she went from... my mom was always more of a Republican, and we really didn't get along because it was like she just did not understand a lot of things. She was against, education, and I'm like, but you have granddaughters, you're against public education. Okay.
Right.
And I don't have the money, and she's like, well, that's your fault. And it's like, how is it my fault when you charge me for rent and I can't afford anything else, and I can't go to school because I'm working full time just to be able to survive? She would do these weird things. It was literally, I was living in that kind of that dictatorship rule with her, and I kept trying to get out. But she, when it came down to it, she first started to like Bernie Sanders, which I thought was bizarre, because she was so against it.
That's a surprise,
she had gotten older by then, and she was starting to think of our college, the girls' college education, and she softened up by then. But then when Bernie didn't win, and then all the stuff about Hillary's emails came out, that was it. Like, she was like... And we had this huge argument because she started going up against, talking all this gibberish against Black Lives Matters, and I'm like, that your daughters are half black and they're marching because they are afraid of the police out here and all that kind of stuff. But and she was like, it's just entertainment. And I was like, dude, what if
what's entertainment?
The whole Trump thing.
Yeah, the flippant vote.
Yeah,
like people who voted for Schwarzenegger.
Her entertainment, and then she also felt. I was like, well, what about people that are going to get hurt? Oh, that's not my concern. I was like, well, what about us? What if we're out here and there's like a race war that starts? Oh, you can always hide in my house. I'm like, what am I, Anne Frank? Like, but she it was like she just lost it, and so. But I've talked to a lot of people that purposefully either it's religion or they want somebody to take the system down, and they just find this entertaining, and they like being disrespectful to people.
That's something I realized in this past couple of years, especially with Milo Yiannopoulos, is that, and then I look back to check this out, flippancy is a portent of fascism, to not take things seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what writer put this down, but they said that the fascist mode of dialogue is to be insincere, because they're counting on the opposition being sincere so they can manipulate that.
Yeah.
And then when they're cornered on something, they're like, oh, well, I was just kidding. And that this is actually, as old as fascism.
Yeah, it tires people out, and it makes them not know what to believe anymore. And that's how it works.
It's like an abuse, a psychological abuse.
Yeah, it's psychological abuse, and you just get tired out.
It's not even really a proper ideology, which is why when people talk about like, oh, how can you know, it's political violence. It's not a political stance. The mass extermination of people is not a political stance. You know, that's not. It doesn't rise
That's
to the
just
level
genocide.
of dialogue. Yeah, it's like anyone.
I'm for genocide. No.
Yeah. If someone is, you know, yelling fire in
And
a
they
crowded
don't
theater,
actually, most
you know.
of them don't, like, because they know they'll be attacked. It's not that they don't believe it. It's because you look at the real neo-Nazis who are unashamed and want to talk about, you know, well, we need to get rid of these people. They are the ones going to jail right now. They are the ones that get attacked and ridiculed the most, while these other people are just, they're playing with them, but they're like, oh, but we don't really mean it. So, yeah. Anyways, I'm going to let you go now. I think that we had a great talk, and I'm glad that you came because I got more insight, because I thought your ideas in why you were doing this was really interesting, and I think it's important for us to hear from somebody who is involved in our local politics, in activism and everything, and kind of get a feel for it other than just what we normally hear, which is, you know, a forum of 1-minute answers that...
No, that's... whew, that is a frustrating machine right there.
That is.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'll be back with somebody else soon, so I'll see you guys later.